I'd be used to this by now, typing with one arm. It takes time to get used to, especially when you've spent most of your life in front of a keyboard. Also, memory digs deep. A few years ago, I was in a car accident. I was going 60 down an empty road, coming home from a long day of overtime, when some kind of animal came charging out of the woods. Trying to avoid a collision, I swerved off the road. My front left wheel got caught in a ditch, sending the entire vehicle careening off the road, only to smash into the trunk of an ill-placed black walnut tree, driver's side first. I have this vague memory of blinking lights and vague shapes in the distance. I was so cold, but at the same time, it was so unreal. I couldn't even understand what had happened. I was brought into emergency surgery. My left arm was literally hanging by the thread of my jacket. It had come clean off by the socket. According to the surgeons, I was lucky. Most of my shoulder was intact, so it became a matter of salvaging what they could. The cut had been clean. I did suffer some whiplash damage to my neck and lower back, but considering I could have easily died or gotten paralyzed, losing an arm was considered quote-unquote mild. Looking back at it, I am inclined to agree. Considering what could have gone down, I was damn lucky. Still, in that luck, I wish I could have gotten just a tiny bit luckier. See, I had this gold ring that I'd been given by my later mother. A simple thing with the engraving of a musical note on the side, a memento of our shared love of music. We played Louis Armstrong at her funeral. That ring disappeared in the accident. Somehow that's what bothered me most. My arm could be reattached, it could heal, but that little memento was just gone. What followed was a long period of intense physical therapy, medication, and painful readjustments. It took weeks before I could even move my fingers again, and when I did, it felt like pushing your nerves through an unwashed garlic press. It was the stunning chemical level kind of pain. The kind where your body just shuts down, begging you to stop. But over time, I started to get over it. Small movements started to get better. I could tie my shoes, press the space bar, hold a knife. I wasn't about to juggle anytime soon or play the piano, but I could get by. Soon enough, I got back to work. People were glad to see me. I wasn't going to be able to work at full capacity in my usual role, but I could still sit in on meetings. I won't bore you with the details, but most of my work relies on answering emails, proofreading, and translation. It's pretty technical stuff that requires a lot of pitter-patter on keyboards. At one point, I was stuck in a particularly drawn-out meeting between two clients that were facilitating. I was there mostly as an observer to fill the seats, but I was supposed to weigh in if something related to my department came up. Of course, it didn't, but I still had to act interested. My colleague was trying to draw up a compromise between the two parties, laying out terms and conditions. Meanwhile, I was nursing a cup of coffee and waiting for the day to be over. Looking over to my side, I noticed something odd. I wasn't just holding the coffee cup with my left hand. I was stroking it with my index finger, sort of like how you'd scratch a wary cat under its chin. It was a strange sensation. I was looking at my own arm, my own hand, and I couldn't feel what was happening. I couldn't feel the ceramics tapping against my finger, or the twitch of the nerve as it contracted and extended. It was just happening, an involuntary twitch perhaps. But it didn't feel like it. It felt intended somehow. A few similar events took place that day. Grabbing the bathroom door for a little too long, knocking over desktop decorations, suddenly letting go of my jacket as I was about to head home. It was just little things. I was still having trouble even using my arm in the first place, so these quirks didn't bother me too much. A friend of mine was giving me a ride home. I wasn't at 100% yet, and sitting behind that steering wheel felt like inviting disaster. Instead, I sat in the passenger seat, nodding off as the trees passed me by with a steady rhythm, causing me to blink. A noise pulled me back. The driver said something, but I wasn't paying attention. Turning to him, I excused myself. "Sorry, what was that?" I asked. "What are you doing?" the driver repeated. I looked over. My left hand was wrapped around the parking brake as if ready to pull. I forced myself to let go. "Nothing," I said. "Sorry, I don't. It's nothing." "Right," he nodded. "Just don't do that." "Yeah," I agreed. "Yeah, no, sorry." That night I was exhausted. It felt like my lungs had been robbed of breath. I felt weak and trembling. I was cold yet feverish, famished but without an appetite. I went to bed early, face planting into the pillow. I had horrible nightmares, none of which I can remember. I kept waking up over and over, not being able to discern dream from reality. My bed was soaked with cold sweat, sending shiver after shiver up my spine. By the early hours of the morning, a stray ray of sunshine burned my eyes open. I was lying on my side, looking towards the window, leaning on my left shoulder. The fingers of my left hand were moving on their own, and not just moving, but bent in every which way, as if lacking bones. They were vibrating, shuddering like wounded worms fearing a predator. I grabbed my hand, and my fingers were back to normal. I could move them as usual. For a moment, I was doubting what I'd seen. It was one thing to experience oddities that was unreal. I must have laid there for half an hour, just expanding and contracting my hand, begging my body to work with me. "Enough of this," I begged. "Please, enough. Please." I clapped my hands, cracked my fingers, and ran them through my hair. It was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary, right? A couple of weeks passed without any serious peculiarities. I could even work there a little. There were a few oddities, like unknowingly grasping a warm cup, or my fingers pointing in all directions when in contact with cold water. Just strange little things that I could easily get control of. That was until one morning at work. We were out of coffee, so I was making myself a cup of tea instead. As the water came to a boiling point, I accidentally spilled some on my arm. The reaction was immediate. My arm whipped out to the side, throwing the pot across the room. For a moment, my arm looked like it didn't have bones, rippling like a skin-covered liquid. It made me think of it not as part of me, but as an alien thing attached to my shoulder. And for a brief moment, in the blink of the heartbeat, I could see my fingers grow and shrink, fingernails throbbing like a cat throwing up a hairball. Suddenly it stopped. Looking back, I could see one of my coworkers watching me from the other side of the room. She must have heard the crash. "You alright?" she asked. "Yeah, just got a burn," I sighed. I'll be fine." She side-eyed the broken pot on the other side of the room and nodded, not entirely convinced. As soon as she left, I looked down on my hand as if shying away from a wild animal. It was alien to me. It was something other. A twitch was one thing, but this was downright unnatural. Coming home that night, I had a weekend ahead of me. I ran my symptoms through a couple of online services. While there were a few ways the human body can trick itself, like the alien hand syndrome or phantom pains, this was different. Physical properties do not rapidly change. Then again, maybe I was imagining it. I decided to do something crazy, an experiment. I wanted to recreate what had happened in the break room. I boiled up some water and poured it into a cup. I held my left hand over my sink, grabbing the cup with my right. I stood there trying to calm myself. I wasn't insane. This was a rational thought that I had to play out in order to eliminate an outlandish possibility. I prepped a cold pack and ran the tap. Then, taking a deep breath, I poured some of the boiling water on my left hand. 12 fingers. My hand split into 12 fingers lined with raw, open wounds. My